Hello everyone and welcome. This video has been a long time tease of mine and a long time project of mine. I've been meaning to get this done for quite a while. I've had several attempts at trying to finish it, and now it is finally time. You can see I'm already painting, no more bullshit, and this one is going to be in two parts in the sense that the audio will contain two different topics. One regarding how I painted them, and the other one I really hope I get to do a lot of lore about these six miniatures. If you would like to skip to the lore, then please do so from the chapters that have been provided. That being said, I really hope that you enjoy this video and I can't wait to see you in the next one. And if you enjoyed this kind of content where I talk about the lore and how I painted the miniatures according to the lore, please share, subscribe, and hit the like button. The old stuff that we have to do on YouTube to grow this lovely little channel that I'm trying to make over here. Now, I really hope that by the time I launch this video, because I'm recording it ahead of me receiving these, but I really do hope I also have a revived interface, so to speak. I've asked a friend of mine, which I collaborated on in the past, Sino, to draw up some new logos and banners for the channel. So again, I really hope you enjoyed this, and without further ado, let's get into what I'm doing over here. You saw me previously paint a bit on Bragg and redo some of the previous work because it got a little chipped, it was a little damaged, and next up I am covering with black all of the body gloves that the Tanith first are using. That's what they call them. Basically, it's their undershirts, which they under armor, so to speak, with their clothes, which they usually refer to as black in the lore. And now, again, while painting these guys, I painstakingly remembered all that I could from the books. I've read the books several times. I think I've read the entire series like 3 times. And by read, of course, I mean listen to all of the audiobooks. Because when I started Gaunt's Ghost, several books were not made audiobooks yet, and I couldn't get the physical books, nor did I have the time to actually read. I found them as PDFs, and I listened to them through text-to-speech. Again, I use a lot of text-to-speech because it's easier for me when I'm driving to listen to an audiobook than anything else. Or on the train, because I am free to also play on my phone or do stuff. Again, getting back on track on the painting, again, use the black all over the plasticky, let's go with that, parts of the last gun, and with metallics on the barrel and the pack, the ammo pack, and I am going to use contrast paints on the wood stock and the support, or that is wooden. I love the attention that they put in these models because, again, these last guns made on Tanith, since their main export was, of course, lumber, and it was a special type of lumber called gnarlwood, and all of their last weapons are made with stalks of wood and supports of gnarlwood. And the modelers took this into account, and all of them have lovely wooden model fiber made there, and it's absolutely amazing. Now, as you can see, Brad, I had a previous attempt to paint him, and I decided to start from scratch and do them all at once. And because of this, I have to go back with white over a few parts that I decided to do different colors. And for this, I wanted to keep the forest theme going, and specifically on their actual armor, because if you look close enough, they have something like carapace armor under their cloaks, but above their body gloves. And so that I wanted to paint a really, really dark green, and I'm going to use Dark Angel's green for this lovely contrast paint that should bring it out. In addition to the cloaks, which I will paint a specific camo pattern. And another thing that I was planning on doing these guys is making their bases forest floor like, and for this I wanted a lot of fallen leaves, and I will explain a bit later on what I'm doing. But before I do that, let me just say the reason that I'm painting a lot of white over them, over Bragg specifically, is because like I said, I already had an attempt to paint him, and I decided on a different camo pattern and formula, so I have to cover everything I did before so it doesn't look darker than the rest. Even though I'm risking him being lighter, this was not the case in the end compared to the rest, and his cloak turned out wonderful. So let me talk a little bit about the colors I chose. For the wooden stalks of the guns, I went with Gaunt fur. While I know it's not exactly a wood color, particularly even in the name, it should be something along the lines of fur. It is a very red rich brown, giving it sort of like vibe, but this is something that I went with and I really liked it, and it fits in with the whole Malwood aesthetic. Alright, but there are other bits and pieces on the models that are woods. I mean, I kind of wanted to have different tones and still easily be used with contrast paints. I didn't have that many other brownish contrast paints, so I decided to mix and match and use. For all the leathery bits and all the leather straps on the cloak, I used snakebite leather, and for the trees that dot the model bases, I made a 50-50 mix between snakebite leather and Gaunt fur, and I used that on all of the trees, and that's mostly all that is related to the wooden parts. For the camo cloaks, I decided to go with a selection of greens and browns, not necessarily all of them contrast paints, because I wanted to have a decent variation in the pattern that I used and the colors that I used. Now, the same colors I then used to create all of the fallen leaves on the ground to simulate the fact that the cloaks tended to blend in all of their environments. And for this, I used in this particular order for the cloaks and the fallen leaves, and I'll explain how I got the leaves in a bit further on in the video. So the colors I used were Orc Flesh, Ogrim Camo, Militarum Green, and Skarsnik Green, and these I just dotted all over the clothes in random pattern and just fill in the gaps with either lines or dots, bigger dots, smaller dots, blobs, different shapes, different sizes, all over the models in a random pattern. After that, I came with a green contrast paint, namely Greed Camo, all over the previously dotted spots on the cloaks and over the white parts that remained on the cloaks. And this gave like a filter over blending even the darker browns and the grays and the lighter browns, as well as all of the greens, the deep greens and the greens. And it gave a uniform feeling to the cloaks, and it kept up the camouflage really the camouflage pattern really well, and it sort of melded everything together. I mentioned that the actual armor is painted with Dark Angel's green, and on these miniatures I've also achieved something pretty awesome. So I achieved two different tones of leather. How did I do this? For the very first time, I can clearly see a difference in between using a lighter undercoat, so to speak, just basically the primer, and using a dark undertone, because I also painted all of their boots and their protection over their boots. I don't know what it's called in English. I don't know what it's called in Romanian. But basically, I painted everything from the waist down black. But when I did the leather bits, I painted all of their belts and pouches, like I mentioned, with snakebite leather. But I used the same snakebite leather on their boot protection, not their boots. Their boots I left black, and this resulted in a very interesting difference in the color of the two types of leather. So the belts and the pouches are much lighter in tone, and the leather protections on their boots looks much darker, and even I can clearly see the difference in tone. I finally understand how you're supposed to use contrast paints and how to use glazes, and I have to say that this is indeed a true game changer for me. While I didn't usually get when YouTubers and other much more experienced painters kept on going about how it's better to use a glaze, now I understand. However, there is something to be said about this. I am not by any chance a painting master, so I don't have their patience, and also I don't have the time. I still work a full job. This is not my full job, and I still have a family, which unfortunately, I'm joking, of course, which fortunately they keep me plenty busy, and I barely have time to do any painting. And then on top of that, you have to put my fourth hobby, which is this YouTube channel, and having to take care of that. So what I'm trying to get at is I don't have the time to make 7 different glazes and put 7 different layers on a single miniature. While I consider these 6 guys one of my biggest project in terms of details and of time spent working on the actual miniatures, I'm not going to be dedicating this amount of detail going forward, especially with the next project, which is definitely going to be the Tyranids in the Leviathan box set. Because again, only speed paints, mostly I think, and of course do them fast and don't really care that much about the quality. Besides this, them being organic, it's really easy to do to make them look good. Relatively easy. You don't have to be perfect with everything. Right. I mentioned the straps. Not much else can be said about the painting process. The skin. For the skin, I went again with my old recipe of Bugman's Glow and then Kislev flesh and flayed white flesh with a mixture of heavily diluted lemon flesh in between the layers to shade and to bring up all of the muscle groups. It looks absolutely amazing. I'm happy with how they came out. What else should I mention? Yes, definitely. I did not paint Bragg like the cover. I honestly believe that the cover art on the box does not do justice to the lore. In my opinion, after listening to the books for about 3 times each, I found no references to Bragg's different skin tone, so I painted them just like I painted him just like I painted all the other Tanith. So using the same color scheme. Then I wanted to talk about the lore reason for me heavily shading these models with oil and then making sure that the model is fully covered in matte varnish. Absolutely every bit, no matter how shiny it would have been, I wanted it to be matte. This has a bit of a lore reference. In one of the books, one of the newly joined members of the Tanith is taught by an older veteran that he shouldn't keep his equipment parade ready with all of the bits of equipment shiny, because they can give away his position. Because part of the lore is the knives. Part of their lore and equipment is their knives that you can see in some of the miniatures' hands, which are 30 which are described as 30 centimeters of brilliant steel, sharp steel, so they call it silver, and they are very reflective, and they're very proud of them, keeping them deadly sharp. And this is something that is reflected in the lore and in the miniatures. But again, getting back to the two characters talking, he specifically mentions that while they are in combat situations, while they are deployed, and when they are preparing for deploying, they always make sure that they dull their blades using shoe polish to make sure they are not reflective and that they cannot give away their position. And the same they do with the badges that they have on their chest, that they have pinned there, so that they never give away the position. And that is why I wanted to make sure that these models were darkened and made sure that this reflected it accordingly. I could have made them shiny, I could have made those parts stand out and be very visible, but it would not have been lore accurate and lore friendly. What else is important to discuss? I made sure that all of the metallic surfaces receive this treatment. I use metallics on the tips of their scabbards for their knives. I use this on their barrels, and so on and so forth. Right. I am guessing that there's not much else. Yes, the bases. I would have forgotten about the bases. For the bases, I used the same colors that I did when painting their cloaks. I took a few bits of paper, printer paper, and painted basically A4 sheets, and I chopped them up in tiny pieces. Painted them in roughly square centimeters, about 5 by 5 centimeters. I then painted those squares in the exact same colors of the cloak, as well as a few more orangey tones, just one or two, not too many. And then I bought a leaflet punch, which makes tiny confetti, but in the shape of miniature leaves. And using that, I then basically made a lot of confetti out of them. I then, after applying Strickland's to the bases, I came with a bit of PVA and added all of those tiny confetti on the bases. And then, in order to have it blend together and to simulate real world conditions, I then came in with a heavy wash of Agrax Earthshade combined with a bit of contrast paint. I don't really remember, but again, it was a brown and heavily diluted with contrast paint, medium, and came all over the base with this, making sure that the leaves looked like they were on the ground for quite some time. And that is how I did the bases. This will be towards the end of the video before the final shots, and that's mostly all I have to say regarding the painting process. I'm going to take a short break from recording right now, and we'll get started with the lore. And now I can begin the lore section of this video. And I want to do it properly and give you the essentials in the proper way. I probably will fail, but this will not deter me from trying. So before we can begin on who these specific characters are, I will just assume that you know the basics of the Warhammer universe, which is that it is 40,000 years in the future. The Emperor, who is a corpse on the Golden Throne, rules the Imperium, and the Imperium spans the entire galaxy, millions of worlds who are constantly under external and internal threat, and one of those threats also happens to be the literal forces of hell, so to speak. In this case, the warp. And from time to time, the warp gains an upper hand and conquers few, or in this case, plenty of worlds and systems. And then the Imperium has to go back and save them. And in this case, we are referring to the Sabbath Worlds Crusade, which is a crusade launched by the Imperium to retake the Sabbath Worlds. Now, the Sabbath Worlds are a group of systems in the Pacificus sector, which is technically to the west, the galactic west from Terra, and they are named after Saint Sabbath, who is a living saint that several thousand years ago claimed the world. She used to be a shepherd, which became one of the greatest military leaders of the Imperium, and then subsequently, again, several thousand years ago. But then was resurrected by the Emperor in order to lead his armies and to conquer the Sabbath worlds. Since it's been quite a long time, the Sabbath worlds have been captured by the forces of chaos, and namely, I keep getting them wrong because there are many, many of these guys, but I think it's no. I keep thinking of Anakar Sek, but that's just a different guy, and it's really, really hard for me to keep all of these guys together. I haven't. Again, this is a bit of lore that I'm making from the top of my head and everything that I remember. I have not made a script for this. I should have, but I'm not really good at this. So let's just say that this is just a fireside chat where I bring up everything that I remember. Alright, so back to the story. The Imperium decided to reconquer these worlds and launched the Sabbath Worlds Crusade, led by War Master Slado. Sorry, my bad. Slado. And amongst Slado's most trusted officers and companions was a young cadet commissar by the name of Ibram Gaunt. Now, Gaunt is a special character. Gaunt is a commissar. He is a political officer. He is in charge of maintaining discipline in his regiment, as well as holding the regiment's officers accountable before the Emperor. He is in charge of morale, he is in charge of discipline. After he became a fully fledged commissar, Gaunt also received a field promotion. This is because after all of these commanding officers of his regiment were killed in combat, he assumed command of the regiment and led them to victory. In such cases, he also received a commander rank in the Imperial Army. And this is where his duality comes from. He is both a political officer and a regular officer. And this has rubbed many of the higher-ups quite the wrong way, and has on one occasion caused problems for Gaunt. That being said, he has very much persevered throughout his career despite all the odds. Unfortunately for Gaunt, his mentor, War Master Slado, was assassinated, and he was then sort of shunned by the following War Master Magaroth. Not necessarily by Magaroth himself, rather by the War Master's staff, who did not know what to make of Gaunt. But as the final will of War Master Slado must be conducted to his end, Gaunt was given the honor of raising new regiments for the Crusade, and he was sent to the planet Tanith, which is a solitary world in the Imperium, whose main export was, of course, Nelwood timber. Now, once he arrived on the planet, he did not particularly like that world. The locals were considered a bit barbaric by the rest of the system, and Tanith was a civilized world who maintained a relatively small population, raising only 3 regiments of light infantry. And those were supposed to be the Tanith, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd regiments. When Gaunt arrived, he did not wish to spend too much time on the planet and ordered the regiments immediately to begin embarking to leave for the Crusade. Unfortunately for both Gaunt and the Tanith, the forces of Chaos also took note of Gaunt to some prophetic degree and decided to attack Tanith right this very moment. Now, Gaunt did not have any significant military forces at his disposal which to fight this Chaos force, and so he decided to make the best, so to speak, the least evil choice of a bad situation, and decided to try to run with the troops that he already had commanded to embark in orbit. Now, don't get me wrong, this is absolutely the best choice in the scenario that was presented to Gaunt. There was nothing he could have done. He couldn't have saved Tanith no matter what he'd done. That, of course, did not gain him any favor with his own men. Out of the 3 regiments that were supposed to be raised from Tanith, only 1 made it out. That is somewhere around maybe 10,000 people. And that is all that was left of Tanith, because the Chaos Retribution fleet proceeded to completely burn the planet to ash. And as far as we know, there were no survivors. So that means that the only regiment that the Tanith did raise were also the sole survivors of that entire planet. Hence making the Tanith only regiment the first and only, as no more regiments could ever be raised by that planet. And as stated, the Tanith men that were raised from there would have preferred, of course, to just fight for their planet and die if necessary, and they would have been okay with that because, again, it is the world that they grew up on, that they lived their lives, and that they loved, because it was, as far as I know, the only planet in the Imperium that had moving trees, and they had their own culture. And right now, they were as much as their own lore keepers as they were survivors. And everything that was left was them. And they were off to war, of course. Fortunately for Gaunt, he did have one thing that could unite them, and he used it. Part of his great history, so to speak, part of his achievements allowed War Master Sladeau to promise Gaunt the right to settle, to colonize the first planet that he was responsible for saving. And he extended this right to the Tanith, promising them that the first planet that they could save, they will be able to colonize. Now, this is a much harder thing to do than it is to say, because just think about it. You would have to conquer a world from the forces of chaos, from the literal followers of the chaos gods, all with less than 10,000 men and basically no support. This is something that to this day, despite their many winnings, the Tanith have not been able to do to any true degree of the world. Now, the fun fact is that the Tanith by far are responsible for the most kills within the leaders of the Chaos Forces. By luck or by skill or by a combination of both, they have managed to eliminate more leaders than any other regiment operating within the crusade. And this has not been noticed. However, we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. Now, as I mentioned before, the Tanith troopers and officers were not very happy with their home planet burning, and Gaunt was just about to have almost a full rebellion on his hands, especially since the higher command of those regiments was actually left on Tanith and were probably dead. So some of the officers, the highest ranking officers remaining, showed up to Gaunt's office demanding that he do something, that he turn the ship around and they be left to fight for their planet. Gaunt did manage to explain to them and made them see that the futility of that action, and promoted some of them to high-ranking officers such as Colm Corbett, who I believe was indeed a sergeant before, and that is how Colm Corbett became the colonel of the Tanith 1st Regiment, almost second only to Gaunt himself. Elim Ron, who was the most calcitrant of the officers, was made a major. However, there is not much time to linger, as after the newly acquired promotions and with men as low as troopers being turned into colonels and majors, it is time to move on, and it's time to get to the Tanith's first and only first deployment. And that happens to be the world of Blackshard. And here, the Tanith use their wits and specialty in the form of scouts in order to break into a besieged fortress through the tunnels underneath and manage to destroy the Chaos Relic that motivated the Chaos Troopers. And once that relic is destroyed, the fighting ceases and all of the Chaos troops actually commit suicide. But what is funny, well, not funny, what is interesting is we actually see how badly some of the Tanith troopers hate and despise their newly found Colonel Commissar, Ibram Gaunt. Ron actually tries to kill Gaunt during the mission. He tries to make it look like Gaunt couldn't make it out of the citadel. However, Gaunt manages to knock Ron out and then drags him out and saves his life, does not leave him to die. We see here that Gaunt is also conflicted about what he had to do, and he's not truly willing to let any more of his Tanith soldiers die pointlessly. He does whatever he can to save it. He knows that he's going to lose men. He is a soldier, he's a leader, but he's not going to be happy going forward ever. And we see this, and we see that whatever he's trying to do, Gaunt tries to do the best he can for his regiment. Next, for the Tanith first, is the Battle of Fortis Binary. It is a forge world where Gaunt not only have to face the forces of chaos, but rather incompetent and malicious higher command in the form of Lord Militant General Hector Drevere, who has a bone to pick with Gaunt and orders the at first to charge enemy lines in the hopes of having them killed. His plans don't really pan out, and the Tanith survive barely, as usually, by the skin of their teeth, but they do with a few losses, and this begins sort of the long of Gaunt having to clean up the corrupt circle of generals surrounding the War Master. Now, this is a constant theme, I believe, in Gaunt's Ghost. There are a few good generals in there, but most of them are self-centered assholes who only care about their advancement, and they don't have any value for the soldiers under their command. This can be seen in several books. Now, again, not much to be said, no major twists and turns happen on Fortis Binary, but it's still a pretty decent book. Again, these are the battles and the locations, not the actual books. I'm not going to list all of the books. One, because there are too many, and it's just going to get really awkward. But if this video does well, I might actually do a complete in-depth review of all of the books and what exactly happens when. We'll see. There are others that are doing a much better job than me at explaining these. People who actually take the time to write the script and follow it. I am not one of those people. Okay, getting back on track. After Fortis Binary follows Menazoid Epsilon. This was a death world that the Tanith were sent in to help pacify. Now, what incredible things happen on Menazoid is, of course, that the Gaunts find almost intact STC, which is a standard template construct. It's a basic manufacturing 3D printer that can make very complex mechanisms and so on and so forth. But what is absolutely incredible, and I think that this is a rather old book, and Games Workshop did not fully know what it was doing and allowed them to play around with this idea. But this particular STC made Men of Iron, which are artificial intelligence, or as the Imperium would call it, abominable intelligence, and they were corrupted by chaos. So yeah, these are sort of like a no-go subject currently for Games Workshop, because again, they're pretty ancient and we don't want to get into that. But what is awesome about this is that, again, another corruptional, and in this case Inquisitor, wants to use these to be able to drive back chaos and to establish a better Imperium in his view, but we know that he's after more power. Fortunately, Gaunt and the Tanith are there to stop it. They actually destroy the STC and blow up that whole complex, and another piece of technology is lost. The thing is, I kind of would wish, but then again, we would be straying away from the grim darkness. It would be fun to actually see the Imperium sort of be able to push back chaos corruption, and it's been known to be done, but it always usually comes with an incredible cost. And this is not one of those books. Actually, these entire series of books are not like that. They kind of focus on the trials and all of the hardships that the common soldiery of the Imperium have to face. And this is absolutely lovely what Dan Abnett manages to do in these books. I absolutely love it, because it's the little bits that happen, not the battles that really get you. You can find battles and even much more spectacular battles, even written by, especially written by Dan Abnett, much better in other places. But what makes this series perfect is the way that these characters struggle. And I'm gonna leave aside all of the lore and all of their battles and what they did, just to focus on a few stories that I recall right now from the books, which are absolutely amazing. And they're really, really tiny stories. Like the poor soldier, the poor sniper that was on track to surpass Matt Lane Larkin, which is an incredible shot, an experienced marksman, and there he has his niche, so to say. He's good, but he's mad in the sense that he hears voices and is maybe touched in some way by either the emperor or something else. It's really weird. But there's this other guy who actually, in control conditions on the shooting range, had a much better accuracy than even Matt Lane Larkin. And he's injured. It's not a life threatening injury, but he has his jaw completely removed and rebuilt in a mechanical jaw. And since then, from a 96 or 97% hit, which is insane considering that he's a marksman and that they are shooting at incredible ranges, and even just to qualify for this you would need a 95. This guy has a 97, I believe, and even Larkin is like a 96. So he was honestly, when it comes to numbers, above him, but unfortunately he was injured, like I said, in his prime, and ever since that he cannot qualify for a sniper squad again, because as it turns out, we find out in the book, his jaw is actually causing him, when he's shooting, when he's pulling the trigger, a microspasm, which makes him not as accurate. And despite this, in his last mission, he's giving a sedative which actually does not allow him to talk, but all of a sudden he can pull off those incredible shots and be as good as marksman as he used to be. And unfortunately, despite this and figuring out what is sort of wrong with him and managing by chemical means to get over his problems, he is mortally injured and dies on the battlefield with his weapon in hand, trying to save his comrades. Again, it's those moments that make this book series absolutely insane. And this is something that I loved. Then there is another character who, in the hopes of saving someone else, hands him his weapon and then picks up a weapon from the battlefield from the enemy, and that weapon is cursed. So that, and is cursed in the sense that it fires only when it wants to. It just causes problems for the guy, and finally he just accepts the punishment and just drops it on somewhere on the battlefield and just moves on. And another one is absolutely insane that I really, really love the story. I can't find the words to explain. Let me just gather my thoughts for a second. Of course, Kefran. How could the Kefran? Oh my god, I can't believe. Oh man, I can't even deal with this. And of course, the Tanith are just like a small part of the story. Oh my god! Now it's coming back. Oh, after they get to Vervenhive and the new recruits from there join the Tanith, there's a problem with the merging of the cultures and how they work out. And good God, I need like hours and hours to talk about these wonderful series of books. But all I can say is, let me just give you a. And with this, I really hope I will put an end to this voiceover because I would just want to mention before I go my favorite book, which is Only in Death. And this whole book is absolutely amazing. It starts off and they just focus just on the Tanith first, and it's their regiment. They're sent to hold a fortress on the very peak of a mountain, and they have to do whatever they can to hold that fortress against other infantry, enemy, and that place appears to be haunted. But it's so you don't know what to believe because again, there are demons, there are ghosts in this universe, but at the same time, it could just be their fatigue and could be their struggles and their mental breakdown and all of their tribulations and the way that the atmosphere that is created in that fortress at the end of the world, that is what it's called. It's Hinzer House. That's how what it's named, and the way they have to trek to it. It's like a journey into the underworld. Your survival there, you're establishing a bastion at the mouth of the underworld just to be able to survive there for a number of days, maybe even weeks, and then constantly fighting, and then finishing that and coming out and still, being who you are, despite the fact that they incurred quite a few losses and none more than the leading, the guiding, the leadership of the Tanith Forest. Because by this time there is another commissar who joined the effort because Gaunt is in charge and needs to delegate some of his tasks, some of his commissarial tasks to other people. That is how Hark came to join the Firth, and his story is absolutely amazing from a guy who was more than just the most by the book you could ever imagine, to seeing him grow as a human being and realizing that not everything is the way it should be, and that sometimes in this universe the Imperium has lost its humanity, and seeing and realizing how far he had to go to realize this. I'm trying to not give you spoilers. At the same time, I want to do an in-depth review, and I am just torn over here because I really don't want to spoil it. I also have a friend who really watches these and enjoys, and I don't want to give too many spoilers. She's reading the books right now, and if I do that, it's just going to ruin them. All right, let's focus again. I highly recommend Hinzer House, and it's a theme. It's not called Hinzer House, it's called Only in Death. Anyway, and there's a theme with what happens in all of the Warhammer books, and especially all of the Gaunt's Ghost series. And that is the sacrifice that has to be made in order for you to move on to the next part. And for you to gain something, there must be sacrifice. And I mentioned that the high-ranking officers in the Tanith Force on Hinzer House are the ones that seem to suffer. There are plenty of deaths, and there are some who don't get to make it back home, so to speak. But it's Gaunt, Hark, and the rest that truly suffer. Because in this one, Gaunt is captured by the enemy and is tortured, and his eyes are taken out, and he is left blind. Fortunately, he will get augmentation, he will have mechanical eyes put in, but this is what Gaunt had to sacrifice in order for the Tanith to win on this world. And Hark is badly wounded because he's burnt on a large portion of his body. Keep in mind that Hark also had quite Hart constantly loses body parts because his hand is mechanical, and he then gets burned, and there are many things. But yet, from the time that he joined the Tanith, he was again by the book, but now he realizes that there are better things than just following the book, and he sees this through Augensorix, who, despite being the most tortured Tanith soldier that ever was from my point of view, despite everything that was done to him because of Hark's by the book attitude, because of this, despite of this, he still wanted to help the Tanith first. I'm not gonna spoil, and I don't think YouTube would actually allow me even to say what happens to Sorik, but it's really, really horrifying. And at the same time, it's downright heartwarming. The end. And with that, I highly recommend you take a few days to get the books and listen to them, audiobooks, or read them, whatever you prefer. But the Gaunt series are an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. But I believe I am coming to the end of this video, and if you really want me to do another video where I go in depth on each of the books, or just a more generalized, just a more detailed version of the entire event of all the books, let me know, and I will see if that is something that I am capable of doing, hopefully with a script next time. Then please leave a comment down below to let me know that this is something that you want to see and are interested in seeing. But as you can probably tell, I'm getting close to finishing painting these guys and assembling them, so I will let you enjoy the final shots. But before I go, I just want to say thank you if you stuck around till the end, and if you enjoyed my content, please hit the like button, share it with a friend, and hit the subscribe button. I really would like to have this video do well, as again, I am a really, really big Gaunt's Ghost fan, and I really want this video to do well. Alright, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, which will definitely be some crittery things.